I need some traction. You need some traction.
Hey everyone, Lloyd Lobo here, co-founder at Boast AI. We're automating access to billions in research and development tax credits to help innovators change the world. Today's session is brought to you by Boast AI Launch Academy in partnership with Founder Institute, Lazaridis Institute, BCF Ventures, and Growth Blazer. Today's topic is particularly close to me because it's about diversity and openness. I recently made this LinkedIn post that cultural fit is probably the biggest BS trope in the history of business. It's become a euphemism to leave people out, and people tend to look at cultural fit as, is this person similar to me? Can I go and drink with this person? Are we the same? But really, what matters is aligning on purpose and values and hiring different. And ultimately, openness is the biggest and most indispensable enabler of growth. And I couldn't find a better speaker than Natalia Williams, Chief Product Officer at Mailchimp. Mailchimp is an absolute fire, one of the fastest growing companies of all times. They've built a massive, massive company and a high growth product and team, and they couldn't do it without being open. Natalia, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, of course, Lloyd. I'm so happy to be here and talk about the subject, also a subject near and dear to my own heart.
Awesome. So you've had a great 15-year background spanning engineering, UX design, production, even product management with big organizations like Bloomingdale's and then now Mailchimp. You lead a 40-person team. Can you share your story and how did you get to where you are today? You said you belong to a family of Jamaican immigrants, so you've had quite the journey then.
Yeah. My family is Jamaican, and came to this country in the 70s to start a better life. And they really stress the importance of working hard. It's like an old adage that Jamaicans have like 20 jobs. It's kind of true. But that we really dedicate ourselves to things that we love. And so when I started my career after college, I actually started as an engineer, and I really wanted to be in a technical field. I had a natural aptitude and interest in the sciences, but decided I didn't want to go to school to be a doctor, which is still a disappointment to my family. But being an engineer was really interesting because I got to create things like from scratch. Like I remember, in college you do your Hello World program, and from there just the wonderment of being able to code something and see it come to life was really exciting for me. But I did not like the debugging part. And so I was not the greatest UI engineer, but I knew I wanted to stay on the product development side. And so back in the day, we used to have both UI designers and developers, which was my job. And then I decided to just stick with the design side. And that's also Ellen. And I think that when I moved into design, I really started to get an understanding of how important it is to connect with the customer and have customers as co-creators. And I love the design side, but I really wanted to get closer to the business side. I started to develop my idea of where I wanted to be in my career. And so I moved into product management, and that stuck. I've been in product management for about 10 years now. And all of that experience, however, has given me such a great insight and empathy for product development teams. I think one, being able to speak the same language as an engineer or a designer, but two, understanding what they go through in terms of being able to create product and how important it is for them to be able to connect with the customer. The voice of the customer doesn't need to come through one person. It really needs to come through everyone. And so being able to get a team to work together and work with customers as co-creators, I think, is really the key to actually driving value and growth through product.
Definitely. That's well said. Awesome. So introduce us to Mailchimp's team. Introduce us to your vision for the future. What does your day-to-day role look like?
Yeah, I love working at Mailchimp because we really believe, every single one of us, that our customer is the most important and most important focus for us. So it is about growing the business, but it's about growing the business in a way that provides value to small businesses. Our motto is that we support the underdog. And for us, that's small business owners. All of us have connections to small businesses. My sister used to run a restaurant and in Brooklyn, and I used to work in that restaurant. It's a hard life. And if you're not really connected from a familiar sense, usually people have a side hustle themselves. And so that passion, I think, drives us to create products that typically are not accessible to small business owners. They're really enterprise products. And so we started out as an ESP, right, with email, and we've expanded our product offering to a full product marketing suite attached to commerce and appointments. And so what we want to be able to do is democratize that technology for small businesses and also help educate them on how to do marketing, how to actually grow your list, how to actually get traffic to your website so that small business owners can really feel total ownership in how they're driving their business. Part of it also is the smarts of Mailchimp as well, being able to automate things for our customer. What I noticed when we actually when we could travel, when we went to customer visits, is that customers really don't have the time. Like the way they use Mailchimp is in 5-minute increments. No one's sitting there for an hour. And so those insights are really helpful for us to learn how to automate a lot of the mundane tasks, to take that out of the hands of small business owners so that they can really focus on their business.
Awesome. And we have a amazing celebrity guest here. Dharmesh is like, I don't like being on camera. We can do audio only. So the founder of HubSpot, Dharmesh, is joining in, and he wants to learn about diversity in product. And Dharmesh, maybe if you're interested, we can pull you up and you can do audio only if you have any questions. You're a much better speaker and moderator than I ever will be. You're an inspiration to me. Awesome. So before we dive into diversity and talk about diversity in high growth teams, what's your definition of diversity?
Yeah, that is a really good question. And we talked about this earlier, but diversity of thought is really what comes to mind. And that comes from diversity in background. And that can be race, that can be color, that can be gender, that can be age, that can be disability. All of those things contribute to our unique experiences as human beings and really drive how we think about the world. And I think diversity of thought is really what's important to me when we talk about diversity, like lived experiences that may be different from each other, but where we can learn from each other and improve collectively. So that's my broad definition of diversity.
How does diversity help when it comes to building high growth teams, right? Like, what are the key things you look for when you hire? How do you set up this culture of accountability? What does that look like at Mailchimp?
Yeah, so diversity, I think, is just kind of table stakes. We talk about diversity as this really nebulous, complex topic, but it really is creating a microcosm of what society looks like, but in an actual business. And so, again, what comes with that is diversity of thought. When I look for potential candidates for a product manager position, I'm looking for folks who think in that way, that think that the collective is opinion and perspective and thought is better than just an individual perspective. People who are curious, that are passionate, that are risk takers, that really love to kind of get themselves mired in the data. The one thing I actually do look for and actively is a pet peeve are people who say like the product manager is a CEO. Yeah, that's having been a product manager, that is not a thing. The product manager is a connector. The product manager is a really driver, an evangelist, but they're not, it really isn't about just running the show. It is about leading a team. So I'm really looking for people who are team players, but also that drive, that passion, I think is super important. And that's not something that just comes naturally to everyone. expectation setting is like key to that, being clear in your expectations. And also, that's a bi-directional conversation. Having the folks across the desk from you also be clear on their expectations and where you might differ. That conversation has been really critical for me, because I've come out of that conversation understanding that we may not always see eye to eye, but having the discussion and getting to a common ground, I think, is super important. I think over communication, anyone who's a product manager knows there is no such thing as too much communication. Checking in, like for me, I never cancel a one-on-one. I may move it, but it never gets canceled. And I think that's really important to, one, create a culture of accountability for the person that reports to you, but also for you to make sure that you're developing that person as well. So those are kind of key tenets that I always keep in mind when I think about building a culture of accountability.
And then when you talk about openness and diversity, it starts even before the hiring process, right? It starts in the culture, it starts in the values. What is the culture at, how have you set the culture and the values at Mailchimp, and what does the hiring process look like in the product organization when you're out there looking for candidates? What are some key tactical tips that people can implement?
Yeah, if I'm looking at really building my culture, for me, what was, I would say a learning lesson for me is my ability to be vulnerable. And what I mean by that is being able to admit mistakes, being able to talk about how you learn from your mistakes. From a leadership position, you set the tone. That happens top down. If you're not willing to humble yourself and admit to when you have made a mistake, or when you've done something and you've learned from it, it's hard for that to cascade through the organization. So for me, the vulnerability, I think, is super key. I think also it's not easy for me, honestly, as a person of color, because I do always feel like I have to have it all together. So it's really hard for me to be vulnerable. But I have found when I actually embrace that vulnerability, I see active engagement and people changing their behavior based on what they're seeing from me. So when I'm talking about looking at how we actually hire, the process is a little involved, right? So if we're looking at the candidate process, we tend to have a panel of individuals cross-functionally. So engineering, design, marketing, product, and also a diverse panel, making sure that we have representation. And those folks are really guided to ask questions about how the person actually thinks about product, how they think about working with teams, how they think about leadership. We do ask questions related to diversity as well. What is their definition of diversity, and how do they think diversity makes the company better? And we also have folks walk through just tactically a business case from a product perspective. It could be choose anything, it's choose your own adventure, but just understanding how that person thinks. So for us, it is a combination of how would you actually thrive in our environment, and then how would you operate from a skill set or a tactical perspective. So we do have folks do a project. That panel is usually somewhere between 5 and 7 people. And then we do scorecards independently. We come back and collect those. And then we actually make a decision about whether that person is actually going to receive an offer.
Definitely. Well said. So Dharmesh asked you, do you have any mechanisms, policies in place to ensure that the candidate list for a given role includes a diverse candidate? And this is a very good one, because how do you craft that message and make sure that you're attracting diverse candidates? Because sometimes you look at these job descriptions and it's that same concept of cultural fit, right? They're trying to pull people in a box. It's not inviting. So what mechanisms and policies in place do you have to ensure that the candidate list includes a diverse candidate?
Yeah, for my organization, it's it's a policy of mine that we have a diverse panel. So we look at and review as a leadership team who's on the panel for the role. Are those the right people for the panel based on what we're looking for technically from that person, and what skill set from a team collaboration perspective we actually want to center in on. The other thing that we do is actually be really active in going to non-traditional places to actually find good candidates. There's obviously LinkedIn, but there's an event called Product Camp. I've been to it in Atlanta. I've been to it in New York. That is an example of a place where I actually have found a lot of diverse candidates just from really networking in the industry. I would say the same thing for Mind the Product, but I think you have to think outside of the box, and it's not about just relying on a recruiter. You really have to do some of the legwork yourself and go to those places. There's also South by Southwest we've gone to and done recruiting events as well. So I think the thought of going beyond and finding folks where they are is super important. And then also being, I think, a little wider in terms of candidates. So there's a statistic that says that women typically look for, if it's a job description, it has 10 bullet points, that we actually try to fit all 10 bullet points, but men usually look at 2. That's something that we actually take and kind of flip that and look at non-traditional experience as well. So have you been in marketing, in engineering, and do you, through that panel interview, have kind of those qualities around curiosity, passion, really an appetite for learning, so that we can actually develop you into a product manager as well. So I'd say keep the aperture open, go to places that aren't just LinkedIn. Those things have really worked for me.
Awesome. And Dharmesh or anyone else, if you have ideas on how you're tackling that to increase the candidate pool to include more diverse people, please drop them in the chat, or I can allow you folks to talk as well. Now, there's one thing that I find very common. Last year at Boast, we ran a 6-week program in partnership with Plato HQ, which is a mentorship platform to help sort of middle level managers level up to CTOs in the product and engineering organizations, or CTOs and chief product officers. And we did a 6-week BIPOC program where we brought in 150 tech leaders to mentor 1,000 people of color and underprivileged, underrepresented communities. And what we found is that these communities oftentimes, 1, don't have access or don't even know the opportunity exists, and 3, don't even know such a role exists. Like product management is one specific one where there's certain communities don't even know that that's a career option. So how do you tackle that? How do you educate people to broaden the scope of product management? You've built a massive product organization there, right?
Yeah, I could give you a great example. Actually, at South by Southwest, we did a recruiting event. We had done a panel about BIPOC people in tech. And at the end of the panel, I had a line literally out the door with people asking me, what is product management? What do you do? What does that mean? And so some of it, I think, is really education and going into colleges and universities to talk about the different options that you have on a product development team. And it's not just engineering. Design is a big component, and being someone who can design for technology, it is a career that's something that is really not well known. And so I think a lot of it is being able to go again to those non-traditional places. I do like to go to colleges and universities and talk about my role or some of the roles that are engineering focused on a product development team, so that they understand that there are some options. And then I think also being really active kind of in your network and in your community on evangelizing product management. It's something that is near and dear to my heart, but seeing people being able to see me as a Black woman and know that from a representation perspective, it's possible for you to be in this role as well.
Definitely. One question here is you've grown this organization to 40 plus people, right? How big is your product team at Mailchimp right now?
About 43
43
product.
people, and it's an agile framework. Walk us through what the process looked like. How long did it take? Any obstacles you had to overcome building this team across 3 offices?
Yeah. So when I started, there were 5 product managers. I started at Mailchimp a little over 3 years ago. And those product managers had come from different backgrounds. So they were engineers or designers, usually, or marketers in their previous career and wanted to start over in product management. So there were a couple of things that I wanted to do. One was be really deliberate with how I built the team. Like there is that urge to want to just hire, and you kind of have to fight that urge. I did myself to understand where are we as a product development cross-functional team? How mature are we? To understand how to scale product along with that maturity. And so for those first 5 product managers, I really concentrated on what it means to be a good product manager. And obviously, there's like the Ben Horowitz article. There's also one on Hacker Noon. I think what makes a good product manager is really the analytical skills, the curiosity, being qualitatively and quantitatively data driven. Those were skill sets that we built up with that team. The other piece was really, okay, now that we have that, what does the leadership team look like? How well-rounded is that team? Because it's really going to be their job to build out the department. I shouldn't be the one hiring each and every product manager. And so I wanted to build a leadership team that complemented each other in their strengths and opportunities, that trusted each other and could have really tough conversations. But at the end, respect each other and come out with a collective understanding of what to do next. Folks that aren't afraid to jump in, folks that are good with ambiguity. And so I started there, right? So I started with, it was 3 group product managers, and then we had the 5 product managers, and then they built out the organization from there, understanding what our expectations are of product managers and how we wanted to introduce product management to the organization. That was another thing when I started. Product management wasn't a discipline within Mailchimp. So, Mailchimp had gone 17 years without having product. And so there was a lot of groundwork that I had to do in terms of making people understand why we want to introduce product, why now, what's the advantage, what does product bring to the table, what does that mean in terms of engineering and designs perspectives, and them bringing ideas to the table. So a lot of my first year was a lot of conversation and a lot of evangelization around the product arm of the company and what that brought to the table. I would say year 2, we really concentrated on scaling product development as an organization. So how do we actually create a working model that really focuses on building trust within the team so that we're not going through that forming, norming, storming cycle every time we spin up a team. How do we think about building subject matter expertise? And so we leaned really heavily on the Spotify model of tribes and squads and gave it kind of our own flavor. And that's been working for us for the past 2 years now. But it was build the team, the core team first, and then fit them into the wider organization. And then as a collective organization, how do we actually build a muscle around how we develop product, and how we actually move into build, measure, learn cycles. So thinking about customer problems first, rather than thinking about what widget to build. So that was really kind of me, boots on the ground for the first 2 years.
Definitely. Let me monitor if there are any other questions. I love that one. Our postings include, if you don't meet all of the requirements exactly or have gaps, we'd still like to hear from you. Use your cover letter to tell us about your unique experience. That was an idea from Stacy on making your job descriptions more inviting. I like that. There's a couple questions here in the Q&A. How do you ensure team bonding and reaching max peak productivity in collaboration and understanding for a diverse team scattered around the world, where like everyone is distributed? How do you ensure that people are connected?
I'm sure I'll be a broken record, but there's a lot of intentionality in how you build distributed teams. And some of this, I mean, we were all forced into distributed teams because of the pandemic, but there's a couple of things. One, I think that distributed teams have made people more empathetic to a lot of the time zone differences and how to concentrate more on achievements than time. So for me, the concept of time, I think, has changed and how important that is as a measure of productivity, because it's not. And how do we make sure that we're more goal-based and giving folks the flexibility to get the work done in the time that they need to get it done? I think this has also been exacerbated by the pandemic and people being caregivers and not working traditional hours, but not really seeing a drop in performance or productivity. I think that's been really, really surprising to me, is that we've had teams go into this fully remote model and they have not lost the ability to be collaborative and productive. But a lot of that takes hard work. We've been a lot more deliberate in communication. I would say Slack is our lifeblood, all things through Slack. We make sure that everyone's brought along for the conversation and along onto the journey. So that means a lot of communication in every means that we can. I think what has been a little bit of a double-edged sword in deliberate communication is that you do lose that spontaneity. You know, people always talk about, oh, I missed the hallway conversation or the drive-bys. And that is something that we've tried to counterbalance. We use donut bots as a part of Slack so you can get to know other folks more organically. But it's been really important for us to be really structured and intentional at a leadership level with how we communicate. And again, that's a lead by example attribute as well. So showing folks that in our attempt to be more deliberate about communication, that that's something that they should do as well. So I think that we've actually been better at communicating. I think it's kind of put us at a disadvantage sometimes in terms of like time schedule, because everything's a scheduled meeting now. But I would say that we've actually been a better company for it because we've been deliberate about how we actually talk to people.
Definitely. Now, Francesca here from HubSpot asks, I run HubSpot's external facing product blog, and my question is, what type of content do you think is most helpful, important for candidates to read from your product team when they're considering applying? Could be related to DNI and B product or both. Like, what kind of content are you guys putting out there?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. So I think from a product perspective, we talk about how we build product. So that is something that I think is really important. Just pulling the covers back and showing like, this is how the sausage is made. I think that's key to folks understanding our commitment to customer empathy, customer value as well. Being out there, things like this, like being out in the industry and talking about how we operate as a company, what our values are, what that looks like. So, and we strongly believe in openness, diversity, equity, inclusion. So that message carries with all the folks that actually speak from the product team. And so for me, it's really a combination of being really personal with our communication, but also talking about our values, our philosophy in both the way we run the company and the way we build product. And then also our connection to the customer. Those things are super important to us in terms of our content.
One strange question here, but I'll ask it anyway. Do you have any specific tips for attracting male candidates into traditionally female-oriented professions like nursing, working with young children? This is interesting. I thought
Interesting. That is that is, I don't know. 'Cause I've never really had that problem in tech. One, I think going back to what I had said earlier about finding folks in non-traditional places, like where they are, instead of waiting for them to come to you. I think that's super important. So if there are organizations around nursing, and they have, well, whenever it gets back to live events, being in those places. I would also say any kind of talks, conferences, super, that is where you can actually do a lot of recruiting and scouting for talent as well. But again, look in those non-traditional places for folks. That I think that goes a long way into finding candidates that you might not come across every day.
And one great point is, again, looking at a diverse pool of candidates, looking to communities where there's diversity, where maybe they don't have access to some of the jobs, and you're bringing them new opportunities. And some people, some communities are just happy to have the opportunity versus be selective, right? Like,
Absolutely. I think that is so true. I will say, and a lot of communities, like I think about my own community, Caribbean community. There's not a lot as many gender stereotypes around roles. Like you could be a male nurse or a female nurse. So I would say also diversity plays a good hand in that as well.
awesome. So now let's shift into diversity in product development. How much of a role does diversity have when it comes to product development and how you build things and sort of the user experience around that?
It's super key, right? Our building product for customers, our product team should really reflect our customer base, and our customer base is a diverse customer base. I truly believe that diversity of team brings diversity of thought and a better product. There are some real world examples I could talk about, as well as examples at Mailchimp as well. But I think that what's really been important is to be able to look at the team and say, all right, what skill sets, what roles, what do we want that team makeup to look like? And how do we actually get those candidates that fit, that are also from diverse backgrounds? So for me, it's been key in building those teams because they challenge each other's way of thinking, because they come from different backgrounds. They challenge the way we build product, and think about it for not just a homogenous community, but a very diverse community. And for us, that actually has gone to building better value prop for our entire customer base instead of one subset.
Any industry examples you can share with the audience where like it's sort of shown the impact in product development, in revenue, in business performance?
Yes. So I wish I could show you this picture of me and my mom, but my when and I'm using this to, we'll get to why that's important. But so my mom was very fair skinned, and we had taken a photograph together, and I used her makeup, and clearly I'm darker skinned, and it just looked like a white cast on my face. And that has been kind of representative of women of color's experience in the beauty industry. It's really made for lighter skin, white women. We don't really have the accessibility. And then along comes Fenty. So Fenty, and it's Rihanna and it's pop star, but what Fenty did was actually employ a diverse team that talked about, and it's just a really simple innovation. Hey, instead of making 10 shades, let's make 50 shades so that we can accommodate the diversity of beauty in the market. Um, what was insane about that was that in the first month, they made over $70 million the first month they launched, because that population had been underserved. And if you look at that group of BIPOC women, their spending power, especially when it comes to beauty, is something that hadn't really been harnessed, right? So Asian American women ages 18 to 34 usually spend 21% more on health and beauty aids than white women. Latinx, it's actually 30%, and non-Latinx Black women, it's actually 9 times, 90%. So it's an untapped market that they went after. I think they had been on Time Magazine's list of 25 best inventions in 2017. And I think today they are valued at $17 billion. And this was literally just from expanding from 10 shades of foundation to 50 shades to accommodate all skin colors.
That is a fantastic example. I love it. In terms of implementing diversity in your team or the greater organization, any sort of top 3 tips here that you think are like sort of people should prioritize? And I shouldn't get into this top 3 things, but sometimes they're like, hey, these are, there's 100 things you can do, but prioritize in this 1 or 2 or 3 things. Keep that in mind at the top when you're planning to implement this.
Yeah, I would say definitely create a culture of psychological safety. It is super important for people to feel like they can trust really giving their opinion and their point of view and still feeling like they belong. I would say openness in conversation, being really honest. I had this mentor that would always say what you mean, don't say it mean, which I love because it's a gift for someone to give you feedback. I know that sounds hokey, but it truly is. And it's people who actually really view you as a partner that will take time out of the day to actually give you feedback. I think this sounds super basic, but remember that they're a person. And I say this because when I started out in my career, I thought that you had to leave your personal self at the door. It was work is work and personal is personal, and none of the two shall meet. And what I've learned in my experience and over the last 15 or so years is that that's really the wrong way to look at things. We talk about bringing your whole self to work, but you are a 3-dimensional person. You are not like work Lloyd and home Lloyd. Like you are the one person. So we should be talking to each other about both personal and business. That creates a stronger bond. It creates a richer relationship. And I've said this actually to my leadership team where we just shared, hey, what's going on with you this week, personal and professional? And my response was, wow, I sometimes forget that we're actual people, like well-rounded people. And I think that actually builds stronger compassion, empathy, understanding if you see someone as their full self.
What do you think are most important to people when you're hiring them? What do people care about the most? In all the, you built massive teams here. What is most important?
Leadership. It really is about having leadership that they can learn from, that they can trust, that they can confide in, that they feel like have their best interest. That just across the multiple teams that I've built, and I think about all the questions that product managers have asked me, it really is, what is your leadership style? What are you like? What is the team, the leadership of the team like? Those things are super important because that really sets the tone of the culture. If it is a culture that is really invested in servant leadership, that comes through when you describe that. If it is a culture that's a little more I would say competitive, that comes through when the leader is describing it. So the one thing that people consistently ask about is the philosophy and quality of leadership.
Definitely. Question here asks, what is Mailchimp's delivery strategy for education as a product to help users skill up on the journey along with all the version and feature upgrades? So this is more Mailchimp product specific.
Yes, that is such a great question. That is actually something that we're working on as a part of our product strategy. So you probably know that from a self-serve perspective, you can always go to the knowledge base, but sometimes that's hard to navigate and you don't know what you don't know. And so what we want to do, and this is part of our smarts, our AI capabilities, is to be able to help educate and tell you what you're doing, what you're looking at in terms of reporting, and then what do you do next? And so you can see that in our mobile app. We have next best action recommendations after you actually create a campaign. You will also see that in things like our creative assistant that actually helps you build your brand and talks about why certain things are important, like contrast, font size, tone, and voice. So we're starting to move into that territory because we think it's important for our customers not only to understand the what, but the why, and learn new marketing tactics that can help drive their business. So that's coming. You'll see that in the app more and more as we develop that capability. But totally hear you, and it's on our ongoing product evolution.
You talked about leadership as being one of the key traits that you look for. So let's dive into leadership first, right? What goals or KPIs, OKRs do you set for yourself and Mailchimp? How you define success?
Yeah. So I would divide them into, like in my head, I divide them into business KPIs and people KPIs. I think it's really important to set KPIs around people engagement, things like retention and attrition, also team health. That's something that I think has been really unique and helpful to us, is to talk about team health, not only on the immediate product department team, but because we're a matrixed organization, also looking at team health within those product development teams. So we look at things like, how do you feel in terms of the time you spend developing product? Where do you feel like leadership can help you maximize your time? Do you feel like your team is gelling well? Those are questions that we ask periodically in pulse surveys to keep an eye on those key KPIs around employee engagement, team health, employee retention. And then from a product perspective, we look at impact and control KPIs related to the customer problem that we're trying to solve. So if I'm looking at my KPIs from a product perspective, they're the broad strokes like CSAT, NPS, activation, active usage. But then I encourage the teams to actually take those macro metrics and break them down into metrics that they can actually use as levers to impact the business. So they'll take active usage and we'll break that down to who's been active in the past 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. We'll look at that on desktop versus mobile. And so for me, there's the KPIs at the top level, but we make sure to kind of decompose that down into the teams so that they're laddering up to our macro KPIs. But I think that, and I just want to stress, the people metrics are just as important as the business metrics. Obviously, the people are the ones that are doing the deliveries, so it's important to understand where they are from a morale perspective at all times.
Definitely. What I gathered through this is the job of a leader is to build, inspire, and motivate a team to deliver. I talked to so many leaders, and that's the key theme. And delivery is the lagging indicator, right? If you treat your people with love, they'll treat your business with love, and your business will grow. How do you make sure everyone on your team is well aligned, not only with the broader company's purpose, strategy, and goals, but also they're treated with love?
That is super important to me. I ascribe to servant leadership, so I really want to check in with folks on how they're doing. Like I said, my regular team, I do weekly one-on-ones, I do skip levels. I do office hours as well. They're usually in my Slack bio, so that anyone in the company can actually come and talk to me. It's really important for me to have regular communication with not only my team, but the organization at large, so that I can understand how I'm doing as a leader and how that's actually helping my team work with other teams. So I think that's really super important to me. And then I think from a pulse perspective, making sure that we're doing things that are actually fun, like work hard, play hard is kind of my mentality. So we do things quarterly, we do things monthly, so that people can take a mental break, recharge, reset. Those things I think are super important as well to keep up morale. So for me, it's making sure that I'm talking to everyone in the organization. And I know that takes time, like it does, but it's an investment and I think it's well worth it. acknowledging the behavior. So I listened to a talk with, I think it was Arthur Blank, and he actually sat down and wrote individual thank you notes to his team in the stores. And I do the same thing. I think that's really important to show like investment of time, that you really care about someone because you took the time to write. Who handwrites anything nowadays? And being able to give that to folks, it does mean something. And so I think that is also super important for you to show that, and not just talk, but with your actions show that you care about folks.
But it becomes very hard to do this and keep it top of mind, especially when you have lots and lots of reports. What do you see as the ideal team structure where you can be personally invested in the growth of the people and not just make it mechanical or robotic? Like
Yeah.
how many people sort of thing like is the hierarchy or structure there?
Yeah, so that's a really good point. So for me, I am not a one person band. I definitely have my leadership activated against this as well. So again, making sure those expectations are clear in your leadership style and how you want your folks to operate. So though I have time for folks in the org, my leadership team is really the one that does the heavy lifting. And so typically I have two vice presidents, I have three directors, and they have built out their teams. So they're somewhere between like 5 and 10 folks on each team. And then those folks report into a group product manager. And then their multiple group product managers report to a director or a VP. So the organization is scaled so that there's a span of control that's actually manageable at each level, to give folks the time that they need to not only do the work, tactically, the product development work, but to spend time coaching and developing people. That does take time. It takes energy. It takes focus. And so being able to create span of controls that are actually manageable for those folks to actually spend time doing that work. And then I'm really talking to those folks about how they're developing their people, right? So it's back to accountability. How do we make sure that we're creating a culture of accountability? So for me, in those one-on-ones, I want to know how people are doing. I want to see if my leadership has a pulse on how their teams are feeling from a morale perspective, from a motivation perspective. Do they understand the strategy, and do they feel like their work connects to the strategy? All of those things I think are super important, to really check in with your leadership, with your second in command, so that they're carrying your message down. It is really about being able to have that message flow through the organization. And that really is about empowering your leaders to carry that message as well.
Definitely. Fantastic advice here. Now with COVID and distributed teams, I mean, we're a small company compared to Mailchimp. We got about 80 people, but distributed across a few countries, and several cities. I often wrestle with this question: how do you maintain trust and avoid destroying relationships, especially in the sort of world of messaging and in the world of messaging and everything online? Sometimes the tone isn't conveyed properly. You may want to say something, or you're under a barrage of messages and you say something and you realize later, ah, man, this, I wish I didn't say it so with such a curt tone. But how do you maintain trust and avoid destroying relationships? What are some signs of bad communication you've seen, and how do you advise people to overcome them?
Yeah, I think again, this is where it's really critical in being able to build both a personal and professional relationship. The more you know about the person, the more likely you are to empathize with that person, instead of seeing them as just a product manager or an engineer. You see them as a mother, a father, a daughter, a son, that they have interest and talent. You actually develop, I think, a deeper connection. What I also think is really hard to do, but is a sticking point for me, is to assume good intent. I think that it's really hard, it's really easy to say, oh, that person meant to do that. But a lot of it, especially with communicating over technology, a lot of tone is lost. And so I always say, you know what? I think this person really is coming with good intent, but let's have a conversation about what just happened. And this is again back to say what you mean, don't say it mean, and be honest. Say, hey, I think that came across a little curt. Just want to understand what's going on. Is there something that we should talk about? I think that's super important in keeping the lines of communication open. And if you really do have a personal and professional relationship with that person, that's an easier conversation. It's easier to talk to your friends about things that bother you than it is to talk to your coworkers. So I think making that kind of deliberate time to learn about folks is super important. The other thing that I think I've seen, so in your what are the signs of bad communication, hearing versus listening. So I think that active listening, though it's a really basic and fundamental skill, is really hard to maintain. It's really hard to be mindful of, oh, this person's talking, I hear them, but I want to make sure that I prepare my rebuttal. And so I'm in my head thinking about it and not really listening to what they're saying. So when we see things like people not really responding to us because they're really thinking about like, what's their reaction going to be? What are they going to say? Or people conversely interrupting a lot. I think that active listening is just a sign of respect and that you're engaged in not only that conversation, but in what that person has to say and their contribution to the conversation. So bad communication skills, I see it a lot. I would say definitely either the interrupting or the not talking at all and not really listening to what the other party is saying.
It's so easy to say, but it's super hard to
Hard to
practice
do.
for all of us, right?
It is.
Any sort of hacks you've learned to practice active listening that you can recommend?
Yeah, it's so funny. I'm not really good at meditation, but I actually use some meditation techniques in active listening. So, like, if I find myself drifting, I will consciously like come back to the conversation, make myself come back to the conversation. In my head, I'm thinking, all right, well, I'm hearing what they're saying, but I really don't agree with that. And it's like, nope, come back to the conversation. I actively do that in my own head. I think also making yourself accountable by being able to repeat back what the person has said. So that's a trick that I use for myself where, okay, I think what I heard you say is blah. And I know I'm on the hook for saying that. So that usually keeps me active in the conversation as well.
Awesome. This has been a fantastic session. I want to take one last question here from the audience. How do you evaluate candidates that are young or don't have much work experience?
That is a good question. So Mailchimp actually has an internship program that we run almost year round. We have summer and fall sessions. And so we've had folks come back for multiple years for the internship, and we've hired once those folks have graduated from college. So that really is our way to really get folks that are right out of school or actually still in school and want to gain some experience and also learn what opportunities there are in technology. That really is our main source, but we also hire college graduates as well, either in junior roles. So on the product side, we have an associate product manager role. There's like an Eng role role on the side of engineering as well. We believe in giving folks the opportunities. So again, painting with a little broader stroke in terms of experience and then getting folks in and seeing how they work within our organization and how they actually really, I think, grow within the job.
Natalia, are you active on social?
If anybody wants to reach me, I'm very active on LinkedIn. Would love to hear from folks.
Awesome. It's Natalia Williams, Chief Product Officer at Mailchimp. I just added you, Natalia. Thank you so much for joining us. Any last pieces of advice or wisdom for the audience?
Yeah, I would say a couple of things. One, be kind to yourself in matters of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We don't know everything. I know a lot of folks feel like, cancel culture is rampant, but I think again, being vulnerable is really a good sign that you are invested and willing to learn. So be kind to yourself. Also, if you don't mind, I just want to plug a Mailchimp event. We are having a spotlight event on June 8th. We have our recently launched stores and commerce products, and we're going to be demoing that. I will be a part of that live demo as well. So I'd love for folks to sign up. The registration's on our homepage.
Awesome. Mailchimp.com. I use Mailchimp as well. Thank you for joining us, Natalia. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks.